I would like to ask that Professor Noah Lewin-Epstein return here so that he may open our day here with some background on this effort that is being done by the Initiative for Applied Education Research. Thank you very much. As I have mentioned, this activity is being conducted using a steering committee. Professor Rami Benvenishti, Professor Dr. Esther Adiafe, and Dr. Analia Schlusser are all members of this committee. Now I would like to begin with some thanks. The catalyst for this activity in Israel was the publishing of the book Wither Opportunity by two of the most prominent editors, Dr. Duncan and Dr. Monet. This book summarized a comprehensive activity on the various manners in which gaps in achievements of children are associated with inequality in the United States. And the impact of this book on Israel has not been small. Richard Monet, one of the editors of the book, has been kind enough to consult and advise us and to promote this project in Israel. And contribution and donation by Spencer Foundation enabled the international collaboration and also the participation of Israeli scholars in the George Washington University in a workshop there. And that is an initiative by Professor Michael Foyer, and I would like to thank you, Professor Foyer, for joining us today as well. I would also like to thank Yad HaNadiv, who have been supporting and financing this research and has impacted the good results. This is also the right time to thank the Knesset's Research Center, and particularly Dr. Shelley Avrami, who is the director of the center, and Mr. Yuval Vorgan, who is the head of the education department there. The center has financed the activity, but we have also enjoyed their good advice and their vast knowledge. And finally, I would like to thank Oded Bosherian, who has put this team together and has made sure that we don't digress too much, and he is responsible for us getting here at the right time. I would like to describe the context a little bit in which we are active in this initiative. This a desire to reach equality in education is a liberal stepping stone, a cornerstone that is acceptable to most of the public. But the link between the idea and its realization is complex, and the more you look into the issues, the answers seem more unclear, and also the concrete idea of equal opportunity seems to lessen. And I don't want to go into too much of this discussion and discourse, but I might say that at the background of this initiative, the fruit of which will be presented today, we assumed three assumptions. The first assumption is that equal opportunity is an ideal. It is not a situation that is currently happening anywhere. Equal opportunity is like a compass that should guide public policy, even if all we can do is make progress in the direction of this compass, whereas the destination itself is not really attainable. The second assumption, and that's more optimistic perhaps, is that through systematic research we can find barriers or also find ways to make education more accessible to the weaker populations, and therefore minimize gaps and decrease gaps. And that is one of the aims of the education system, despite its many limitations. Using various activities, the system can reduce the distance between the ideal of equal opportunity and the various opportunities in practice. Against the backdrop of this is also a third assumption, and we felt it was an urgent matter because the increase in gaps between the various sectors over the last 3 decades in Israel has made it effectively less possible to make education available to all. In other words, the high level of inequality in Israel is making it harder to make the correlation between families' financial situation and their children's education. And the relationship between what's happening within the families and what's happening in the education system is very complex and is also open to many interpretations. It is a complex problem, but in Israel it's also difficult to examine this systematically because of a lack of data over time. Although we have to say that recently there has been progress made in the collaboration between the various entities and elements in order to create the right databases. In the next few minutes, I would like to give you the context of this activity, of the activity of the initiative, and I would like to speak in four parts. First, I will talk about inequality in Israel and the trends of inequality. The second part will delve on the question, why do we need to be concerned by the increase in financial inequality? The third part will talk about the difficulty that the education system is facing due to this inequality, and the fourth section will precede the discussion we'll have later, because many of the lectures we will hear today will talk about the potential of increasing and bridging the gap through various intervention programs and means. The determination that Israel is one of the least equal countries in the world, or the OECD mostly, is very well grounded, and there's no reason to talk about that too much. Data from 2010 and 2011 show that only 4 or 5 countries of the 34 OECD countries rank even higher in inequality of disposable income than in Israel. Earlier this month, we were given another reminder of the inequality in Israel because there was the poor level report that was published. 19% of families in Israel and 31% of children, according to this report in Israel, are poor. And according to data in the report, in Israel, we are placed at the worst, we rank at the worst position, which we share with Turkey. So we are used to high levels of poverty, but since the 2011 social protest, we have become more aware of another trend that has to do with economic inequality, and that is the erosion of the working class, of the middle class. In a research recently published by two economists, Ofer Kornfeld and Oren Danieli, in the journal Israel Economic Review, this research shows trends of inequality in Israel over the last 25 years, from 1987 to 2011, and one of their greatest contributions is that they are looking at the different changes that are happening at the top part of the distribution of income and the lower part. And when you look at these trends in inequality, you understand better the economic processes that Israel is undergoing over the last few decades. In the top diagram you see here on the slide, you'll be able to see the changes in hourly wage decile ratios, and also the changes between the percentile hourly wage versus median hourly wage. And you see here the polarization process. The wealthy are getting further and further away from the other parts of the population, and also reducing the gap between those in the middle of the graph and those at the bottom. And in the bottom part of this slide, we see the explanation. Wages have gone up at the top more than the bottom. The middle class has not disappeared, it's just the income of some of the middle class at least has minimized or decreased relatively and has become more similar to that of the lower levels, the lower percentile deciles. So the poverty problem, which is in itself difficult, actually has an impact on the lives of many people living in Israel today. Why is extreme inequality a concern? In his book, Justice as Fairness, John Walls gives us several reasons why equality should be discussed in its social sense. One reason is speaks of moral. He says it is unjust that some of the people in the population, or even many of them, will have many means, whereas some, or even a few, will suffer with distress. And this poverty report definitely shows us and makes us wonder what kind of society we want to live in. Is this gentle, fragile fabric of society, is it being broken as we give up solidarity with the rest of the population? And whereas the first reason is more moral, the second is more pragmatic. It says that social gaps encourage political inequality and increase the danger that many people's lives may become less good than they could have been. And in this sense, large inequality or high inequality actually jeopardizes democracy and liberty, which we view as so important. And this is important for us in the education system. We wish to argue that the danger of inequality is that the weaker population, those who have less financial and political resources, will be perceived in time by them in their own eyes and in the eyes of others as inferior. Social gaps, especially when they are passed on from generation to generation, will create the kind of atmosphere where the weaker part of the population will not be able to realize the same opportunities. And it is therefore unsurprising that equal opportunity is just as important as equality and freedom, and as basis for justice as fairness. One of the common ways of defining this is is whether is mobility, intergenerational mobility, or immobility. You have to look at the status of the original family, and when the same happens from generation to generation, that means there's intergenerational immobility. If we imagine for a moment a society where the offspring's opportunity is completely different or completely disconnected from their parental families, then we'll see a disconnection between the parents and the offspring, and then we'll see a high mobility, an intergenerational mobility. So we see this mobility in between generations, but we also see clear patterns of continuation between the education levels and income levels of parents and their children. And those who speak of equality, they want to reduce this immobility and to take the children from the lower levels and allow them available or access to education. What do we know about the connection between levels of income and levels of education? From parents to children, the intergenerational transmission of advantage. John Ermish and his co-authors talk about all the potential outcomes of being raised in inequality, and they say the most complex thing to study is the option that rising inequality will lead to less intergenerational transmission. And this was impacted by Miles Corrick, that resonated in many other studies. They compared data from various countries and looked at the link between economic inequality using the Gini index and the link between the income of parents and their children. And the findings he presented using a diagram that places all the countries he compared on these two axes. What we see from this diagram is that countries where there is high inequality on the x-axis, we will see a high correlation between the earnings of parents and children on the y-axis, which means the higher the inequality, the more immobility between generations and the less ability for the children to realize their opportunities in life. And it's true that these are cross-sectional data. It doesn't show the causality of the process, but definitely gives us a picture of why we need to research the process of immobility versus inequality. And what they call such diagrams is the Great Gatsby curve, which is an ironic name in and of itself, but we don't have time to talk about that. Even though many scholars have criticized the indexes in many countries and how we can actually compare them, it still seems that high levels of inequality definitely lead to less mobility between generations and less equal opportunity. When we talk about equal opportunity, many scholars talk primarily about education. And that's because in the technology and knowledge society we live in, education is the most important factor for determining people's chances in life. And therefore, it seems that the data shows that the socio-economic status of parents and their children's chances in life reflect that educated parents manage to pass this advantage on to their children, and these advantages can be translated by the children later to the financial achievements of their own. And we have very few data in Israel, but we do have data in Israel here that shows us there's a study by Blank and Shavit that was published by the Taub Center, and they used census uh, from 1995 and 2008, and they looked at the correlation between the achievements in education of parents and their children who are about 30 years old. And they used also another variable, which is the father's employment prestige. And they found that the probability of completing high school with a matriculation diploma and also attaining a first degree, a bachelor's degree, definitely has a correlation with the employment of the father. And also the socioeconomic status of the family and the children's education achievement. Not only has it not was it not weaker in 1995, but this link, this correlation was in fact even stronger in 2008 and was even more prominent in completing high school than in getting a bachelor's degree. So as we try to bridge these gaps, we have to talk about the education catch, because when we talk about equal opportunity we actually create high expectations, whereas the high levels of inequality go against realizing these aspirations. And so in this respect we can actually liken the education system to a boat that society sails on the sea and expects the boat to go against the current. And when we look at equal opportunity in Israel, it is a problem that Israeli society as a whole is dealing with. And we, as many do, are saying that it's a education system issue. But we have to understand the social context that this education system is operating in, both in Israel and in many other unequal societies. This is a toolkit that allows these children to use these tools when they get into older society, and it is supposed to contribute to a better society and also to enhance the chances, the personal chances of good lives for these children. But we need to do this relative characterization. This is positional good. When people strive to work in jobs um, that are high paying and prestigious, it's not only people's education, but it's also the distribution of the education of others that has an impact. The more people there are that a person's that have less education, the more of a chance that this person will have. Which means that not only do you want to get a higher education, you want to get better education than others in order to be in a better position to succeed in life. And therefore, the increase in inequality actually polarizes this, because it means that high inequality has an impact on the risks and chances of those families who are taking care of the future of their children. And so if the wealthy are wealthier, it means that for those who are successful, what they get is more. And if that means that if you're not in the top 10 or 20 deciles, it means that the ability to have a good life is much smaller, which means that the winner gets it all, and families are doing everything they can in order to ensure that their children will have the right tools for success. But even if the motivation of all families are similar, their abilities are different. There are huge financial gaps between various families, and therefore there are also differential opportunity and availability of resources to help their children. Parents that have means and the social groups they belong to will be less tolerable of this aspiration of the education system to actually bridge the gaps. And here there's an interesting um, data by the study by Durham and McDonald's. They tried to look at informal help between children and the PISA results from various countries. And the data on the left hand diagram show a high correlation between the inequality in income on the x-axis and getting a private tuition on the y-axis between between children from families who are educated and not educated. And on the right, you see the gap between the frequency of getting help in studies from uh, family members between children from educated families and non-educated families. So, whereas the families talk about more, so whereas the less educated families help each other directly, but there's a bigger gap when it comes to private tuition. We should also notice where Israel is on this diagram. On the left hand side, where there's private tuition, paid tuition, Israel is very high when it comes to positioning the gap between educated families and non educated families. On the right hand side, which is the frequency of getting help from family, gaps in Israel are not very high. So it seems that it's not a matter of parental motivation. What it shows is that the economic gaps between families lead to educational gaps, and that causes this to be passed on from one generation to the next. This is not individual actions of families. This is just that the education system is supposed to act for a social goal with more equal opportunity, whereas many social and political and economic entities have different goals and they're sometimes opposing goals. Only recently, these difficulties or even failures have been expressed by Yuli Tamir's book about her time as the Minister of Education. Therefore, the education system will not solve the inequality problem in Israel, and nobody is saying it should. But what I have said until now, and despite all the constraints, we need an education system that will be socially motivated. We, as a society, don't have any better means by which to promote equal opportunity. And this system, when it's best, can change the track of the lives of these people and to give those disadvantaged children a chance. And today we will be discussing various aspects of the education system, the early childhood education, the segregation and budgeting, and we hope that the discussions today will place these issues on the agenda and will also give the education system better, more concrete tools to use in these areas where it is able to have an impact and to promote equal opportunity. Many studies have demonstrated that when there is an intentional policy to make these people have better opportunity, the education system can have a difference. And the challenge now being faced by the education system is to have the equal opportunity compass high up and to use its resources in order to go in this direction. These are the kinds of things we will be discussing later today. Thank you very much.